Right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. This is the information session for SHRF's Mobilize grant, a Truth in Action focus. And I'm Chelsea Cunningham. I'm a Programs and Engagement Manager here at SHRF. A couple housekeeping things first off. This session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. For anyone joining us live, there is a Q&A box that you can use to ask questions at the end. I'm hoping that I'll get through the information in about 30 minutes or so, and then there'll be lots of time at the end for any questions or extra time for you to go get started on your applications. And just before I jump into the information today, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that SHRF is here in Saskatoon on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. But we really serve the province of Saskatchewan as a whole, and this includes all First Nations and Métis people who live on this land, settlers, everyone. And so we're offering this Truth in Action focus to really bring reconciliation up in the best way that we can through funding. And we're always trying to learn and do better and figure out how our funding can support you doing this work the best it can. So thanks again for being here. I'll be talking about reconciliation more, obviously, as we get going, which leads me into our agenda today. So I'll be touching on who is SHRF, what is the Mobilize grant, why we're doing the Truth in Action focus, and then into the more nitty-gritty application details of who can apply, how you apply, and some key takeaways and questions. So first, for those unfamiliar with SHRF, SHRF, or the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation, is a provincial agency that funds, supports, and promotes the impact of health research that matters to Saskatchewan. So we're publicly funded. We receive our funding from the government of Saskatchewan through Innovation Saskatchewan. And we use this funding to invest in research and supporting activities. So this includes developing and carrying out funding competitions, upholding a peer review process to make sure we're investing in the best research, partnering with other organizations, measuring impact and sharing stories of this research and knowledge, which is where this grant today ties in. And then also acting as a trusted and neutral convener for the health research community and the health community as a whole. So typically we support health research, so any field, discipline, or methodologies that address any area of human health. So that whether that's strengthening the healthcare system, improving the health of all people, or developing new medicines, treatments, it's all covered under our mandate for health. And then we have a few different grant programs. If you're interested in those, there's lots of information on our website. Today, I'll just be focusing on the Mobilize grant. So this one, a little bit different compared to the rest of our grant programs. Instead of funding health research, this one's funding knowledge mobilization activities. And so what that means is it's just activities that are bringing awareness to research or knowledge. I'll get into the Indigenous knowledge mobilization in a second here. But anyway, bringing awareness to this knowledge in a way that can be used in practice and improves the impact of health in Saskatchewan. So that can be compiling best practices in a useful form, disseminating or exchanging knowledge, co-creating tools, education and materials. This list should be much longer, but it's pretty open to whatever you have that you think would improve the awareness and usefulness in practice. It's probably eligible. So just a little bit more about knowledge mobilization. So we're really focusing on that exchange between researchers or knowledge keepers and knowledge users. So when we say knowledge user, we're really just referring to any individual who can receive and use new knowledge to implement improvements in health. So this is individuals, practitioners, community organizations, policymakers, etc. For the truth and action focus of this specific call of the Mobilize grant, we're really focusing and using this opportunity to bring reconciliation to the forefront. Hopefully you're familiar with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Canada calls to action. There's 94 calls to action of actionable recommendations meant to aid the healing process, both through acknowledging the full history of the residential school systems and its impacts, and creating systems to prevent these abuses from ever happening again in the future. And then tying this back to the Mobilize grant of why we chose this opportunity to support reconciliation. Indigenous knowledge translation is summarized in some literature as best as sharing what we know about living a good life, which really resonates with the purpose of the Mobilize grant as well. And then in that process of establishing and maintaining respectful relationships. So I've pulled a few examples of calls to action here that can fit the purpose of the grant. So there's the call to recognize, respect, and address distinct health needs of Métis, Inuit, and off-reserve Aboriginal people. Those within the healthcare system that can recognize the value of Aboriginal healing practices and use them in the treatment of Aboriginal patients. And then, yeah, calling upon the schools to specifically educate their students about Aboriginal health issues and the history of residential schools. There's lots of ways that reconciliation ties into improving health, which is why we're focusing this grant on the calls to action and requiring applications specifically identify which call they are working towards. So a lot of these calls will say calling upon the federal government, but there is also a role for every level of individual in these calls to action, whether it's the health system, the schools, individuals, community organizations. I think we can all benefit from working towards this. So back to the specific grant objectives. So besides addressing one of the specific calls to action, very broadly, the activities should be either facilitating the use and integration of these, I'll say health research knowledge, but for this call, it's health research knowledge or Indigenous knowledge. We recognize that as a valid source of knowledge and evidence. So they should be activities in this grant. There should be facilitating either the use and integration of knowledge into practice and decision making, or facilitating the use of relevant knowledge to inform and guide research activities or other implementation activities, and facilitating the participation of non-academic team members in this knowledge sharing process. So it's a lot of words just to say that the grant needs to be supporting the exchange of knowledge, and at least one of the parties has to be outside of the university academic field. Basically, yeah, if it fits that short definition, it probably fits one of these three objectives. If you have any questions about your fit, you can definitely reach out to me at any time, and we can walk through it and figure out how best it fits. Because yeah, unlike some of our grant requirements, you'll notice there's not a lot of specific requirements in this grant, as long as that overarching objective is met. And that's really because we know the application process itself can be a barrier for some of these activities, and we're trying to keep it as accessible as possible while still making sure everything upholds the purpose and all our funding policies. So the funding details, so the grants, you can apply for up to $10,000 for a one-year term. There's no matching funding requirement. The timelines, it is for a 1-year term, but we are fairly flexible in granting extensions if it takes longer to complete the activities. These are just no-cost extensions where there's no additional money, but you have more time to complete it if things happen, especially when you're collaborating and working with multiple groups. Delays happen, and that's okay. As long as your timeline in an ideal world could be finished in a year, there shouldn't be any issues there. So deadline is not December 25th, that is Christmas. Let me double check my real deadline. I believe it's December 19th. Yes, December 19th. So you can get these applications off and then go on your Christmas break. And then over the month of January, they'll get reviewed and you'll be notified in time for the funding start date of February 1st. Just a couple notes here that you can only submit one application as the principal applicant, but you can be a team member on multiple applications if you're working with more people. And our deadlines are always 4 p.m. Saskatchewan time. So make sure everything's in place ahead of time. Yeah. All right, and so then that's kind of the why and the what we're looking to fund. So now I'll get into the who can apply. So that's the eligibility, team requirements, other requirements that you'll need as you fill out your application. So first of all, so every application will be submitted by a principal applicant, as we name them. So this is the person that's taking on responsibility for administering the grant. So they will hold the funding, they will compile their expenses, or their institution will compile the expenses and submit the progress reporting and financial statements to SHRF at the end of the grant. And there's just a couple rules about who that person can be on a grant. So they need to reside and work in Saskatchewan for the funding period of the grant. They cannot be a trainee. So students can't apply as the principal applicant. But if you have a supervisor that's willing to administer the grant for you, you can still be a co-PI. We also, the principal applicant will have to agree to adhere to all SHRF funding policies and reporting requirements. So this is just done by a notice of acceptance and signature once the grant is awarded. And they must have a position that supports them to carry out activities that promote health practices on behalf of their organization for public benefit. So this could include the post-secondary institutions that have a memorandum of understanding with SHRF, but it can also include registered charities and nonprofit organizations. So just a quick reference for the institutions with an MOU with SHRF. So you have the universities, colleges, and the health authority there. For charities and nonprofits, there will be some additional information required. The MOU has all these organizations set up to receive SHRF funding and report back to us. So just any charities and nonprofits that are holding the funding, they'll also have to provide banking information to receive payment if the application is successful. They'll need a CRA registration number and contact information for the financial office or a designated bookkeeper / person who is able to provide the financial statements to SHRF at the end of the grant. If the grant's extended, then we'll require another financial statement. Those are just done annually. And depending on the organization, we may also need additional information regarding your charitable status and experience receiving grants, and purpose and governing documents of the organization, such as an annual report, certificate of incorporation. This is just to ensure that the boxes are checked and there will be no issues in our audit of who we're sending funding to. The way the system's set up, I have to manually give permission to nonprofits for the application. So If you're not sure of your charitable status, you're encouraged to contact me prior to the application just to make sure everything's in order. And especially if you're a nonprofit that's not a registered charity, the RMS setting will probably not have permission until I manually set it. So make sure to just contact me first. It's not an intensive process. It's just something that we have to make sure is checked off before you can move forward. So that was the principal applicant. In terms of team, there's no minimum requirements on this grant for additional team members. But that's not really to say that you don't need a team on your application, especially with the focus on reconciliation. It's hard to picture a grant that is one person working by themselves that is successfully addressing the objectives and the calls to action. So whether they are added to the application as official team members, or they're just providing letters of support, or if they're providing in-kind resources of saying like, yes, I'm going to invest some time to help you carry this out, or any other relevant methods of support to show that you have more people invested in this project beyond you will be very helpful. We've kept the requirement of how they show their team members show their support just to be more accessible. But we would expect to see some type of support on the projects for the most part. So if you are adding team members to the RMS in an official co-applicant capacity, there are 3 roles they can be added as. So co-applicants, as I mentioned, so these are people who are helping lead the project in terms of intellectual, cultural, or scientific direction. You can also add your personnel onto the application. So this is anyone who's actually doing the project and may or may not be getting paid from the grant funds to do the work. And then there's also supporters who are supportive. The way I always describe it is they're supportive of the application and interested in it, but not necessarily guiding the work or contributing yet at this stage, or maybe contributing in a very defined role. So supporters usually provide the letter of support. Co-applicants usually provide time or knowledge to the project. Under the co-applicant designation, there are a few different descriptors. So this can include, so co-applicants can include researchers who are contributing to the scientific direction, knowledge users who have interest in the applications of the knowledge. So maybe guiding the more practical applications and lived experience, knowledge, practices into the project. And then people with lived or living experience who very much have that lived experience perspective to guide the project to make sure that it is informed by real experiences and people. So just a note that typically co-applicants cannot be compensated from grant funds. So that's to say you can't pay yourself from the grant to do the grant activities. But there is an exception for knowledge user time release if they are using employment time to participate in the grant, and the employer can be compensated for allowing them that time, or people with lived experience can still receive an honoraria for their time. So the application requirements the application package goes into these in a lot more detail, so I encourage you to also read through it. But at the high level, when you're getting your application together, you will need to make sure that your application has addressed one of the calls to action. Your proposal will need to include a background and rationale for the project, referencing evidence-based practices and research or traditional knowledge. In that proposal, you should also identify specific project goals and objectives. This helps make the review process easier if the reviewer can really clearly see what your goals are and how everything else you've described fits into those goals and supports them. So kind of got ahead of myself. So have a clear activity plan that is supporting your specific objectives. Make sure you've identified the target audience for this grant. That doesn't necessarily need to be its own standalone section, but make sure it's clear that the activities you are conducting towards your specific objective are reaching the audience that they need to. So it's always a good idea to consider your audience when designing your activity, making sure that it's the best fit for who you're trying to reach with it. The proposal should, maybe specifically in the background would be a good spot for this, but you should really identify the need or the gap in current practice this activity is addressing for the target audience / knowledge users. So beyond that, you're using an appropriate activity to reach the desired audience, that they really have identified, or someone has identified that this is a gap in current practice that should be addressed. And the proposal should also address any feasibility issues of the project. So this can include things of, say, if you're trying to reach an audience and you're not sure if they're as open to it, you can discuss alternate routes of trying to connect with them, things like that. And this just helps really solidify that you've thought through that activity plan and your objectives and who you're trying to reach, and have some backup ideas. Not necessarily backup ideas, but just that you've really thought it through and this is the best way. If this doesn't work, we'll know why. And it's been thought through thoroughly. And then finally, just for allowable expenses. So SHRF is publicly funded, so all expenses must be clearly justified. There'll be, I think it's a 2-page document where you're allowed to explain the budget expenses. So this can include things like getting a quote for the contract that's needed, explaining why that specific contractor is required, an estimate of the number of hours a trainee would have to spend on the project, a breakdown of how many people are expected to attend, and how much lunch or travel costs it'll take for them to attend, just things like that. So it's clear that we know how the final number was arrived at and why. There's a few general policies for allowable expenses, for not allowable expenses. So generally equipment is not allowed. If there's something that's really needed for the project, you can contact me to see about getting an exception approved. We define equipment as anything that has a useful life beyond the duration of the grant. So anything that is being used only for this grant is probably not considered equipment, just something to take note of there. We also don't allow academic dissemination costs from these grants. So that's no peer review journal articles or research conference presentations by the researchers. Yeah, and then the SHRF funding guide has policies that apply to allowable expenses for all programs. If you have any further questions, it may be answered in there, or again, you can always send me an email to see if it fits or not. Right, and then so the last section here is how you apply. So I already mentioned once about the RMS and accessing the application for nonprofits. The RMS stands for our research management system. So it's an online portal with the URL there. And so that has all of our application and grant management aspects housed there. So that's your #1 place to go visit as you're working on this application. But there's also supporting information in the application package, which is on our website, our SHRF funding guide, and there's also an RMS manual on our resource page, which can be helpful when working through the application itself in the RMS. So in the RMS, if you are the principal applicant, you are going to be creating the application and taking responsibility for getting it submitted and managing the grant after it's funded. If you are already in the RMS, then you can just log in and open up an application. If you're new to the RMS and to applying to SHRF grants, you'll have to register on the system. And this is where the different registration options where you may need to contact me. So if you're a SHRF MOU research organization, you check that, you're good to go. The CRA registered charity list, you can look the charities up by name and select the correct one. And those also have the correct permissions to access the application straight away. If you're a nonprofit that's not a registered charity, you will choose the other organization option. If this is your first application to SHRF, your organization will need to be added to our system directory. The MOUs and the charities auto pull from an online list, whereas the other organizations have to be manually added. So you just contact me with the organization's name and mailing address, I think is all we need to put you into the system. But if you want to do your incorporation number and all of that stuff at the same time that I'll need for eligibility, it's a good time to do it. If you've already have a SHRF account associated with your organization, you'll just need to still contact me to gain access to the application form, because I'll have to manually set that permission as well. And Tanya's asked me to note that if you already have a SHRF account, but it's under a different organization than the one you want to apply with, you just contact her and she can switch that or add multiple organizations to your account, no problem. So once you're registered, you can log in on the homepage. There will be available applications at the top. You create an application and then your application is there on your homepage that you can edit, save, and come back to at any time. Once you have completed your application, submitted it, it comes to SHRF for review. So they are reviewed internally with external reviewers as needed. And the review process really emphasizes for this one the alignment with the grant objectives and focus, and checking that all the application requirements are in place. Is subject to the amount of funding available. We have a pretty good budget for this funding opportunity, but if there was a very high demand for application, that will affect the success rate, obviously. The review criteria I talk about on the next slide, I believe. And then the team will be provided with some review comments following the review, regardless of whether you're funded or not funded. So the review criteria, again, these are expanded a lot in the application package itself, so I encourage you to read through those as well. But the review will look at the quality of the proposal. So this one is very much looking at just, have you included everything from the application requirements that was supposed to be there? And then also how much it aligns with the objectives, and if those proposed activities very clearly support those objectives that you've identified. And this one would also be if you've clearly identified one of the calls to action and address those in a logical manner. We also look at engagement. So is your audience clearly identified? Are the proposed activities relevant to that audience? Do you have evidence of the resources required to complete the project beyond the SHRF funding? So that includes things like your in-kind support or team members that have the relevant expertise, things like that. It might even be already the existing collaborations to reach the audience that you've identified, or at least a good plan of how to reach that audience. And then finally, the outcomes and impact. We also look at the potential for the activities to do what they hope to do. So will they have a real impact on health outcomes if they successfully reach the audience? Do you have a clear idea of what area you're trying to impact? We also look for an evaluation plan. This doesn't have to be extensive, but just some kind of indicator that will be used at the end of the project to show that you've done what you said you're gonna do. This one's a little trickier because obviously a lot of these impacts on health are not 1 year initiatives. The project can be done successfully in a year, but the impact on health might not be seen for many years or after a few follow-on projects. But so we're just looking for kind of like an interim measure of if this is successfully done, it'll set you up for these potential impacts later down the road. So that was a lot of information. A couple key takeaways that I'll re-emphasize. If you take nothing else away, remember these. So the application has to show the involvement of knowledge users, but it's flexible to meet this requirement in a way that works for your team. Show who your team is and how they contribute to the project's success. So we don't require any resumes or other information submitted by your team members. There's just a document where you can outline who's on the team, briefly who they are, what their background is, and then what they're doing to contribute to the project. Also, when writing your background, it's always a good idea to really focus the rationale on why your activity meets that need or addresses the gap, rather than giving some stats on why a health issue is important. Especially in this, we know reconciliation is very, very important. So you can tailor your background and use your space a little more effectively going into the specific gap that you're trying to address. And also note that academic knowledge sharing isn't eligible under this funding activity. So that's anything within, I shouldn't say within the university, but that type of knowledge sharing of like publishing peer-reviewed articles in research journals or presenting at research conferences won't be necessarily eligible. I have seen a couple exceptions though, which is why I kind of stopped, but where they were taking Indigenous traditional knowledge and sharing it in academic spaces. So that's still fitting the objectives because one of the parties isn't your traditional academic research professional. So just something to note there. And then as I mentioned on the last slide, including that feasible evaluation plan. So the large impacts may not be directly measurable for many years, but just give some thought to if there's anything you can look at in the interim to show that the activity was successful and did what it intended to do. And then a note that the application will be reviewed by non-experts. So especially if you're coming from a more research-focused background on this, adjust your terminology accordingly. Yeah, and then if you're coming from the less research-focused background, you don't have to be intimidated. We're not expecting a research grant in these. We just really want to see that the activities have been thought through and you have a very clear goal of how you're sharing this knowledge. So my contact information's on here for any questions about eligibility, application requirements, etc. We also have Tanya's contact here, and she is our #1 support person for the RMS. If you're having trouble getting in, finding something specific in the application, she's there to help you out. And then this last slide just has a couple helpful links for later. I'll be sending these slides out, so you'll have these links in your inbox following this webinar. And with that, that is all the information I have for you today. So I'll stay online for a while for as long as there's questions. Just a reminder to use the Q&A box for those, because I think the chat is disabled and I'm not sure if I can unmute people to ask questions in a webinar format. Let's see. See raised hand. Oh, I can allow to talk. Yeah, Sanjukta, I think I've unmuted you.
Yes, hello, hello, and thank you for your presentation. It's very helpful. I'm at the College of Education at the University of Saskatchewan. We are thinking of a project that's directly not direct health in the sense that it's not at the College of Medicine or something like that. But at the College of Education, we have a prairie habitat garden, and we have medicinal plants, and we have a lot of Indigenous researchers who would like to use this space as connecting to schools and supporting Indigenous students who are going to be our future teachers. So we're thinking that way, but we don't have a full idea of how we're gonna formulate the application. I have these few questions. First of all, does this resonate with you at all in relation to what do you think if it's in line or not in line at all? Now I'd appreciate hearing from you. The other a few questions I was thinking, are there, I probably should look into the website more, but I was thinking, are there examples of previously funded applications? Just so we can get some idea of what are the projects that got funded in the past. I also was thinking how many grants maybe will be funded in this cycle. And I also was thinking whether the slides will be shared. So sorry, too many questions, but
That's okay.
yeah, we can tackle one.
So I'm gonna answer them in order of easiness. So the slides will be shared. I do have announcements of previously funded grants from this competition, so I can also throw a link to those in the email when I share the slides.
Excellent.
I think the budget is for 10 grants right now, which I think usually we end up with 5 in the past years. So unless there's a huge uptick in application intake, it's a pretty healthy success rate.
Cool.
Yeah, and then our budget for this, it's under the Mobilize grant budget, so there's a little bit of flexibility there. Anyway, yeah, the success rate will be fairly decent. What's the other one? Oh yeah. Back to your first question about whether it resonates. I would say absolutely. That sounds like a really good project. And yeah, like you said, not traditionally health as in like under the College of Medicine, but health and wellness isn't just medicine. So as long as you're just very clearly outlining that like this is improving the health and wellness of your students, of their future students, even through just cultural recognition, absolutely, I think it fits. Was there another question that I forgot?
No, you have great memory.
Yeah.
Of all of them. Yeah, you have answered all of them. Thank you very much.
Perfect. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Don't see any questions in the Q&A box yet. I'll stay online for a little bit longer still, but if there are no more questions, I'll just take this chance now to say thank you all for coming. As I've mentioned multiple times, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. And I look forward to seeing some of these applications and projects get funded. Thank you.